The bundle of damp, foul-smelling fabric hit my chest before falling to the floor, while the laughter of three young women flooded my own living room. I am Dorothy. I am 68 years old, and my hands carry the calluses of someone who raised these walls brick by brick. The document that holds the fate of this property rests in a safe whose combination only I know. And today, the clock started ticking. The physical impact of the clothes against my body didn't hurt as much as the silence that followed it. A thick silence that settled in the stale air of the room. I looked at the garments scattered across the carpet I had vacuumed myself that very morning. There was a cheap silk blouse stained with makeup at the collar, tight sweatpants that still held the acrid stench of dried sweat, and a pair of socks that had rolled until they brushed the tip of my orthopedic shoes. The smell of cheap, sweet perfume radiating from Chloe, my daughter-in-law, mixed with the reek of the dirty laundry, creating a suffocating atmosphere that seemed to perfectly summarize what my life had become over the last 2 years. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let my shoulders drop. Behind my back, the muffled sound of the television coming from the end of the hallway reminded me that in this house, I was completely alone in my trench. That television was turned on by Walter. My husband, Walter, is 72 years old and has perfected the art of cowardice with a mastery that sometimes, in my darkest moments, I almost come to admire. We've been married for 45 years. In our youth, he worked at a lumber mill, and I made my living as an upholsterer. My fingers still carry the scars from the curved needles used to stretch heavy leather over hardwood frames, from squeezing the rough staple guns until my joints screamed in agony. With the money from those restored sofas, from those dining chairs brought back to life, we bought this lot. I mixed the cement myself on weekends. I painted every single window frame. Walter helped, of course, but his spirit was always fragile, terrified of conflict, prone to bowing his head at the slightest sign of a storm. Now, with old age, that fragility has hardened into a shell of indifference. When Chloe raises her voice when the slammed doors from my son Jason make the windows rattle, Walter simply adjusts his hearing aid to turn it off, cranks up the volume on his football games, and disappears into his own mind. He decided that peace is bought by surrendering territory, ignoring the fact that invaders are never satisfied with just one corner. The invasion didn't start with screaming or with dirty laundry thrown in my face. It started with tears and broken promises, the way the worst family tragedies usually begin. Jason, my only son, had tried to open a business importing cell phone parts. He took out loans he couldn't pay. He trusted partners who abandoned him at the first sign of bankruptcy, and at 40 years old he found himself staring into the financial abyss with a wife who wasn't willing to give up her lifestyle. I remember the night they showed up at my door. It was pouring rain, one of those November storms that turn the streets into rivers of mud. Jason had red eyes, slumped shoulders, the spitting image of defeat. Chloe was standing next to him, gripping a designer suitcase that contrasted absurdly with the misery of the moment. She was crying too, or at least faking it with a conviction that actually moved me at the time. "It'll just be for a few months, Mom," Jason begged as we sat at the kitchen table and I poured them hot coffee. "Until I get a steady job and we can rent something small, I swear we won't be a burden." I looked at my son, the boy whose school costumes I had sewn, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and I felt that ancient pull in my gut that condemns mothers to sacrifice their peace for the survival of their blood. I said yes. Walter nodded silently from his chair, already surrendering his territory. I gave them the guest room, the largest one after the master, the one with the big window facing the rose garden I had planted myself 3 decades ago. I made room for them in my closets, cleared out 3 shelves in the fridge, and handed them a set of keys. That was my first tactical error. I thought I was opening the doors to a temporary shelter, when in reality I was handing over the keys to my own prison. The first few months, they kept up the facade of gratitude. Chloe would wake up early, make breakfast, sweep the patio, and call me Miss Dorothy, with a sweetness that made my teeth ache. Jason got a job as a route supervisor for a logistics company, a decent gig that paid the basic bills. But human beings can't fake their true nature for long. Chloe's courtesy had an expiration date, and it expired the exact moment she realized Walter wouldn't enforce a single rule, and that I, in my desperation to keep the family peace, preferred to stay quiet rather than start a war under my own roof. The metamorphosis was gradual, calculated, almost imperceptible at first. First, their contributions to the household expenses vanished. The money they were supposedly going to hand over at the end of the month to help with the water and power just stopped being mentioned. When I finally asked Jason about it one day, after getting an electric bill that was double our usual usage, Chloe stepped in before my son could even open his mouth. "We're saving for our own place, Dorothy," she told me, dropping the miss for the very first time. "We thought the whole point was for us to get independent fast. If we pay you rent, we'll never be able to leave. Besides, this house is already paid off. It's not like it costs you more to have us here." The logic was perverse, twisted, but Jason looked at her with pure devotion and nodded, his eyes begging me for patience. I shoved the bill into my apron pocket and paid it out of my pension. I kept quiet. I watched, and I started taking mental notes of every move on the chessboard. Then came the hostile takeover of the physical space. My potted ferns and African violets were banished to the backyard because, according to Chloe, they gave her allergies and made the house look like a grandma lived here. In their place came shiny plastic decorations, fashion magazines scattered across the tables, shoes dumped in the hallway. The kitchen, my sanctuary for 40 years, turned into a minefield. Chloe stopped cooking entirely and started ordering takeout almost every night. Greasy pizza boxes, half-eaten cartons of Asian food, sticky glasses, everything was left on the counter for me to clean up the next morning. If I didn't do it, the ants would invade. Jason would leave for work before the sun was fully up, blind and deaf to the disaster his wife left in her wake. When I tried to talk to him alone one morning while filling his thermos with coffee, he cut me off with an impatience that hurt worse than any insult. "Mom, please. Chloe's depressed about the whole situation. Don't pressure her. Just clean up whatever she leaves out. I'll make it up to you later. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." That was the exact moment I understood I had lost my son. He was no longer the man I had raised. He had become the human shield for a woman who despised me. And Chloe's contempt wasn't quiet. It was active, loud, and deeply cruel. Once she realized how passive I was, once she saw that I would clear her plates and scrub her grease-caked pans without complaining, she started treating me not as a host, but as a live-in maid she had scored for free. Worse still, she spun a twisted narrative to justify her presence in the house to the outside world. I heard it for the first time about 8 months ago. Chloe was on the phone in the hallway, her voice ringing out with that grating shrillness of someone who needs the whole world to pay attention to them. "Yeah, girl, it's exhausting," she said, sighing dramatically. "Jason and I had to move in here to take care of the in-laws. They're getting really old, you know. Dorothy can barely take care of herself, and Walter is practically deaf. If we weren't here keeping this place running, they'd fall apart. It's a massive sacrifice for our marriage, but family comes first." I was standing 10 feet away, holding a laundry basket that weighed 20 pounds a basket, that held her bed sheets and my son's work shirts. I felt the blood boiling in my veins, a furious heat rising from my stomach straight to my throat. The lie was so colossal, so shameless, that for a split second I was ready to drop the basket, walk right up to her, rip the phone out of her hand, and scream the truth to whoever was on the other end of the line. I wanted to tell them she hadn't paid a single utility bill in a year and a half. I wanted to tell them she slept until noon. I wanted to tell them this house was kept standing by my daily labor, the sweat of my brow, and the money from my pension. But I stopped myself. My personality has always been that of a woman who thinks before she acts, someone who knows that battles aren't won with impulsive screaming matches in a hallway. As an upholsterer, I learned that if you cut the fabric in a fit of frustration, you ruin the whole piece of furniture. You have to measure twice, take a deep breath, and cut only when you are absolutely certain the line is perfect. I gripped the plastic edges of the laundry basket until my knuckles turned white. I turned around in silence and carried the clothes to the bedrooms. That day, something soft and maternal died inside me, and in its place, an ice-cold sentinel was born. That strategic coldness was what allowed me to endure the following months. I watched as Chloe invited her friends over more and more often, turning my living room into her private country club. I watched as Walter retreated to his corner earlier and earlier, cranking up his sports games to block out reality. I watched Jason come home, exhausted, kiss his wife on the forehead, and lock himself in their room, completely ignoring me unless he needed his uniform ironed. I kept cleaning. I kept cooking. I kept paying. But I also started getting my paperwork in order. I reviewed the deed to the house. I went to the notary in absolute silence one Tuesday morning while they were still asleep. I asked precise questions. I got clear answers. And I locked the resulting documents inside the wall safe, hidden behind the false back of my bedroom closet. A safe that Walter had forgotten even existed, and for which only I had the combination. I was prepping the battlefield, waiting for the exact moment Chloe's insolence crossed the point of no return. That moment arrived today, a Thursday afternoon that started with a palpable tension in the air. Since noon, Chloe had been frantic. She announced that 2 of her best friends were coming over, women she knew from her days of supposed wealth, women who wore designer labels and drove brand-new SUVs. Chloe wanted to impress them. She wanted to keep the charade alive that she was the lady of the house, the self-sacrificing benefactor managing a massive estate. At 1 o'clock, she found me in the kitchen cooking a lentil stew. She stomped in, arms crossed, glaring at me. "Dorothy, I need you to turn that off," she ordered, pointing at the pot. "The smell of poor people food is going to get trapped in the drapes. I ordered sushi platters and imported cheese boards. My friends get here at 4. I want you to deep clean the living room, dust all the furniture, and make sure the guest bathroom is spotless. And please, when they get here, don't hover around. I don't want you making them uncomfortable. You can stay in your room or go sit in the yard with Walter." I looked at her. I just looked at her. There wasn't an ounce of respect in her eyes, only the cold demand of someone who believes they have absolute power over an inferior. In another time, any woman of my generation would have raised a hand or unleashed an insult that would have rattled the drywall. But not me. I nodded slowly. I turned off the burner under the lentils. I grabbed the dusting rag and headed to the living room. I cleaned. I polished the oak wood that I had sanded down myself 20 years ago. I vacuumed the carpet. I scrubbed the guest bathroom until the tiles reflected my own tired, expressionless face. Walter watched me from his recliner. He saw the tension in my jaw, and without saying a single word, he stood up, grabbed his little portable radio, and walked out the back door into the yard, running away from the incoming confrontation, just like always. At 4:15, the doorbell rang. I heard Chloe's heels clicking frantically down the hardwood hallway. She opened the door, and a chorus of high-pitched voices and exaggerated gasps invaded the foyer. It was 2 women absolutely loaded down with gaudy jewelry and perfumes that assaulted the senses. From the kitchen, where I had obediently retreated, I listened to the dynamic. Chloe guided them into the living room, offering them white wine and arranging the food platters that I had been forced to receive from the delivery guy and plate on my best ceramic serving dishes. The conversation was frivolous, empty, peppered with shrieking laughter. They talked about vacations they could no longer afford, purses they wanted to buy, and the lives of other people they looked down on. And as was inevitable, the topic shifted to me. "Oh my God, Chloe, this house is seriously huge," one of the voices said, dripping with fake admiration. "Isn't it so much work to keep up? With how old your in-laws are getting, you must be exhausted." "You have no idea, girl," Chloe answered, sighing, with that theatricality that was already suffocating me. "It's a full-time job. I literally have to follow the old lady around so she doesn't make a mess. She's losing her mind, you know. She forgets to clean, she cooks stuff that smells awful. But whatever, Jason begged me to be patient. We put a roof over their heads and feed them. The absolute least they can do is try not to get in the way. We put a roof over their heads. That phrase floated in the kitchen air, heavy as an anvil. We put a roof over their heads. In the house my callus is built, in the house whose deed is exclusively in my name because Walter insisted on putting it in my name 3 decades ago to protect me if he died. In the house where I pay the electric, the water, the gas, and even the Wi-Fi that Chloe uses to upload pictures of her fake life to the internet. I waited a few minutes. I let them drink more wine. I let them relax into their little bubble of superiority. Then I picked up an empty serving tray and walked toward the living room. My initial intention was simply to clear the dirty glasses to maintain my submissive facade just a little longer, to mentally document the humiliation to fuel my resolve. I walked into the living room in total silence. The three women were sitting on the main sofa, the exact sofa I had upholstered in dark green velvet that took me months of saving to afford. When they saw me, Chloe's friends went quiet, looking me up and down with a mix of pity and absolute disdain. Chloe tensed up. She didn't like her maid interrupting her stage play. Her eyes narrowed. She wanted to prove her authority. She wanted to make it crystal clear, right in front of her audience, who the real queen of the castle was. She stood up abruptly, marched down the hallway where she had intentionally left a basket of her dirty laundry from the last 3 days, and came back into the living room. She stood less than 3 feet in front of me. The friends watched with wide eyes, practically eating popcorn, waiting for the show. Chloe reached into the basket and pulled out a handful of clothes. Without warning, without a single shred of human decency, she threw the bundle right at my chest. The impact of the damp, smelly fabric made me take a half step back. The clothes hit the floor with a dull thud. "Wash these right now," Chloe said, raising her voice to make sure every single syllable echoed off the living room walls. Her tone was sharp, dismissive, loaded with a completely unnecessary cruelty. "I need that blouse for tomorrow, and scrub those sweatpants hard. That's why we give you a free roof in this house, so you're at least good for something. Don't think we're just keeping you around as a decoration." The silence that followed was absolute. The TV down the hall was still murmuring, but in the living room, time seemed to freeze. One of the friends let out a nervous little giggle and brought her wine glass to her lips, looking away. The other one just stared a hole through me, waiting to see if the fragile old lady was going to cry, beg, or have a nervous breakdown. I didn't do any of those 3 things. I kept my eyes locked on Chloe's face. I saw the arrogance in her tilted chin, the challenge in her dark eyes, the desperate need for validation hiding right behind her cruelty. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to scream at her so she could turn to her friends and say, "Look, I told you she's crazy. She's impossible to live with." If I had exploded, I would have handed her the exact ammunition she needed to justify her behavior to my son and to the world. But I am a tactician. I have survived poverty, backbreaking labor, a husband who was a ghost in his own home, and the crushing disappointment of a weak son. A spoiled little girl playing house wasn't going to break me with a pile of dirty laundry. I didn't say a single word. My face didn't betray a flicker of emotion. Slowly, with the deliberate care of my 68 years, I bent my knees. The popping of my joints was the only sound in the room. I reached out with my rough hands and picked up the stained silk blouse, the sweatpants that reeked of body odor, and the socks. I pressed them against my apron. I stood back up, keeping my spine perfectly straight, never breaking eye contact with Chloe. Her haughty smile wavered for a fraction of a second when faced with my absolute silence, with the complete lack of submission in my eyes. There was no defeat in my stare. It was a death sentence. I turned around. I walked past the friends who pulled their legs back as if they were afraid my very presence might infect them with some disease. I walked down the hardwood hallway. Behind me, I heard Chloe's exaggerated sigh. "Oh my God, you really have to teach them who's actually in charge," she said, her voice regaining its swagger now that I was walking away. "It's literally like dealing with toddlers. Anyway, pour some more wine, guys." The laughter erupted again, filling my house with a mocking echo that embedded itself in the walls. I walked to the end of the hall, crossed the kitchen, and stepped into the laundry room. The cold tile under my feet helped center my thoughts. I flicked on the fluorescent light. I looked at the white washing machine I had bought with my own savings 3 years ago. I looked at the detergent, the fabric softener, the scrub brushes, and then my eyes drifted to the right corner of the room. Sitting there, neatly folded, were the black trash bags. Heavy-duty, industrial-grade plastic bags I used for clearing out thick brush and yard waste. The clock had started ticking. The indignity had reached its absolute limit. The debt had just been quantified. I threw Chloe's clothes onto the closed lid of the washing machine. The smell of sweat and cheap perfume filled the tiny space. I stepped over to the corner, grabbed one of the thick black bags, and snapped it open with a sharp flick of my wrists. The sound of the heavy plastic cracking echoed like a gunshot in the laundry room. I threw in the silk blouse. I threw in the sweatpants. I threw in the socks. I didn't stop there. The decision was made, the plan was in motion, and there wasn't a force on this earth that could make me back down. I pulled the laundry room door shut behind me, making sure the latch clicked firmly into place, cutting off the noise from the living room, ready to execute the opening move of the endgame. The thick black plastic of the industrial bag crinkled between my calloused fingers as I opened it all the way. I didn't stop with the makeup-stained silk blouse, or the sweatpants that reeked of stale body odor, or the socks that Chloe had thrown at my chest with the sheer arrogance of someone who thinks they're untouchable. My eyes scanned the small laundry room, landing on the overflowing wicker hamper my daughter-in-law had dragged in there that very morning. It was a mountain of negligence and vanity. There were designer jeans with rhinestones on the pockets, tight dresses that smelled like cigarette smoke and nightclubs, lace underwear she always demanded I hand wash with neutral soap, and fine knit sweaters she left dumped in random corners of my house. All of it was sitting right there, waiting for my 68-year-old hands, the exact same hands that had mixed the concrete for the foundation of this property, to give them back the cleanliness their owner lacked on the inside. I grabbed the wicker hamper by the handles and dumped it straight into the black bag. The clothes cascaded down, mixing with the dust and dried leaves that had settled at the bottom of the plastic. I didn't feel angry. Anger is a hot, reckless emotion that makes your hands shake and clouds your judgment. What I felt was absolute clarity, cold and sharp as broken glass. I shoved my arms deep into the bag and pushed the clothes down hard, compacting the fabric to make more room. I grabbed a second bag off the shelf and did the exact same thing with the coats and jackets hanging carelessly on the rack by the back door clothes Chloe hoarded out there, claiming the closets in the guest room were too small for her wardrobe. I tied off the ends of both bags with dead knots, twisting the plastic until my knuckles went white. They were heavy. They weighed almost as much as 2 years of silent humiliations, unpaid bills, dirty plates abandoned on my counter, and blatant disrespect in front of guests. But my back, used to hauling rolls of leather and solid wood frames for decades in the upholstery shop, didn't break. I dragged the first bag across the tile floor to the side door that opened out to the cobblestone alley, then went back for the second one. The wall clock in the kitchen read 4:35 p.m. In my neighborhood, the city garbage truck runs on an unbreakable schedule on Thursdays. It rolls through at exactly 4:40, announcing its arrival with the deep roar of a diesel engine and the high-pitched squeal of air brakes. I kicked the side door open. The late afternoon sun hit my face, lighting up the dust particles floating in the air. In the distance, just 2 blocks away, I heard the unmistakable sound of the truck turning the corner. I dragged the bags out to the concrete curb I had leveled myself 20 years ago. I stood by the edge of the street, smoothed my apron over my stomach, and waited. The massive white and green vehicle hissed to a halt right in front of my house. Hanging off the back, gripping the metal bar with the casual familiarity of a lifetime doing it, was Frank. Frank is a man baked by the sun, with broad shoulders and an easy smile, who's been working these streets for 15 years. He knows every neighbor. He knows who recycles, who sneaks construction rubble into their bins, and who offers him a glass of ice water on a brutal summer day. I always kept a pitcher of lemonade for him in July and baked him sweetbread in December. Loyalty in working-class neighborhoods isn't signed on paper. It's built on daily respect. Frank jumped down to the curb, wiping the sweat off his forehead with his forearm. When he saw me standing next to the 2 massive bundles, he raised a bushy eyebrow. "Afternoon, Miss Dorothy," he said, walking over to the bags. "Wow, looks like you decided to do some serious spring cleaning today, emptying out the attic. These bags weigh like they're full of rocks." "Good afternoon, Frank," I replied, my voice as steady and monotonous as the truck's engine. "It's not the attic, just accumulated trash, things that aren't useful anymore, taking up space and attracting pests. I needed to get them out of my house, once and for all. Frank nodded, not asking another question. That's the virtue of people who work hard for a living. They understand that some burdens just need to be thrown away, no explanations required. He grabbed the knot of the first bag, bent his knees, and heaved it into the steel jaws of the truck's hopper with a grunt of effort. Then he did the exact same thing with the second one. The silk blouse, the exclusive jeans, the lace underwear, all of it landed on a mattress of rotting organic waste, soggy cardboard, and the neighborhood's leftover food. "Hit it, kid," Frank yelled to the driver, slapping the side of the truck with an open palm. I stood there perfectly still on the curb and watched. The hydraulic mechanism roared to life with a deep mechanical whine. The massive steel plate came down without mercy, trapping the black bags. The thick plastic held out for a fraction of a second before bursting under the colossal pressure. Through the jagged tear, I watched the shiny silk of the blouse Chloe needed for tomorrow get irreversibly tangled with coffee grounds and rotting fruit peels. I watched the machine shred, crush, and swallow the entire wardrobe, shoving it deep into the darkness of the compactor, until there wasn't a single trace left. The sound of metal crushing fabric was, in that moment, the most beautiful symphony I had heard in years. "All set, Miss Dorothy," Frank said, jumping back onto the rear bar. "You have a good afternoon, and take care of yourself. You're looking a little pale." "I am perfectly fine, Frank." "Never better," I answered, and it was the absolute truth. The truck pulled away, taking the first installment of the debt with it, leaving behind a sharp smell of diesel exhaust that I breathed in deep. I walked back into the house through the side door and slid the deadbolt locked. From the end of the hallway, the echoes of Chloe and her friends' shrieking laughter still drifted out of my living room, completely oblivious to the execution that had just taken place mere feet away. I didn't go toward them. I walked in total silence to my bedroom, the master suite at the far end of the opposite hallway. I opened the door and locked it behind me. The room was dim, wrapped in that dusty stillness that old marriages live in, once love has been replaced by habit and exhaustion. Walter wasn't there. He was probably still hiding in the furthest corner of the yard, tuning his radio to avoid hearing the world fall apart. I walked straight to the heavy oak wardrobe that took up the entire left wall. I pushed aside the thick winter coats that smelled like mothballs and pressed against the wooden panel at the very back. It gave way with a soft click, revealing the small wall safe set right into the concrete. I spun the steel dial. 41731. The metal door swung open smoothly. Inside, protected by a clear plastic folder, rested the original deed to the property. I pulled it out, sat on the edge of the bed, and clicked on the nightstand lamp. I ran my fingers over the stamped paper, feeling the raised texture of the signatures and the official notary seals. The document was in my name, exclusively mine, Dorothy Carmen Salazar. When we bought this land, Walter had insisted on doing it this way. Back then, he was working at the lumber mill, surrounded by giant saw blades and dangerous machinery. One day, a guy he worked with lost an arm. Another lost his life entirely crushed by pine logs. The terror of leaving me destitute if he died in a workplace accident pushed him to put the only asset we had under my absolute legal control. As the decades passed, Walter forgot about that legal detail, just assuming that marriage automatically turned everything into a shared asset. Jason, our son, grew up believing the house was the guaranteed inheritance of the patriarch, and Chloe, in her infinite arrogance, assumed that by manipulating Jason and bullying Walter, she already had the keys to the castle in her pocket. Not a single one of them remembered that in the eyes of the state, this dirt, these bricks, and this roof belonged to me, and me alone. I put the deed into my black leather purse right next to my ID and the water and power bills I had paid with my pension. I took off my orthopedic house shoes. I slipped on a pair of sensible walking shoes. I fixed my gray hair in the vanity mirror, and I walked out of the room. I walked down the hall, stepping carefully to keep the floorboards from creaking. I passed the living room without looking inside. I just heard the clinking of wine glasses and my daughter-in-law's voice saying, "She's honestly just losing her grip, guys. I gave her a blouse to wash, and she probably fell asleep in the kitchen." I walked out the front door, closing it in absolute silence. Arthur Vance's law office was 15 blocks away, down a tree-lined avenue where the old neighborhood mom-and-pop shops mixed with modern bank branches. Arthur wasn't just a respected attorney and notary. He was an ally of a breed you rarely see anymore. He'd known my family since before Jason was even born. He was the one who drafted the purchase contracts for the lot, the one who advised me when I wanted to make my little upholstery business official, and the one who watched my hands go from soft to covered in scars from hard labor. I got to his office at 5:15. The brass bell above the glass door announced my arrival. The smell of old paper, fresh coffee, and floor wax wrapped around me, instantly giving me a sense of order and legality that my own home had lost. Arthur was sitting behind his mahogany desk, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses while reading a file. When he looked up and recognized me, a genuine smile lit up his wrinkled face. But the smile vanished quickly when he noticed the tightness in my jaw and the way I was clutching my purse against my chest. "Dorothy," he said, standing up immediately. "What a surprise. Come in, please sit down. Is everything all right? Is Walter okay?" I opened my purse, pulled out the clear plastic folder, and slid it across the polished surface of the desk. "Walter is alive, Arthur. Whether he's okay is another story, but he's breathing," I answered, my tone stripped of any emotional dressing. "I'm here because I need to initiate what we briefly discussed the last time I came in for a consultation. I need the official paperwork, Arthur. Today. You explained to me that since my son and his wife don't pay rent, have no lease agreement, and don't contribute to structural expenses, the law considers them tenants at will, living there under my tolerance. As the sole registered owner, I have the absolute right to revoke that tolerance and demand they vacate the property. I want it in writing with stamps and signatures revoking their permission to live on my property. I want the document to set a strict, non-negotiable 30-day legal deadline for them to empty out, remove their belongings, and hand over the keys. And I want it made crystal clear that if they don't, we will proceed with law enforcement." He was a man of the law, but he also understood the weight of human grief. "Dorothy, listen to me very carefully," he warned in a soft voice, leaning across the desk. "I will draft whatever you ask me to. My duty and my loyalty are to you. But I want you to understand the consequences of crossing this line. Jason is your son. If you hand him an eviction notice signed by a notary, the break will be permanent. There's no going back. Your daughter-in-law will use this to turn him against you forever. Are you absolutely certain you want to start this war?" I thought of my banished plants, my rejected cooking, my life reduced to servitude in the house I built with my own hands. "I am not starting the war, Arthur. The war started the day I gave them the keys to my house, and they decided I was just an annoying piece of old furniture," I replied, my voice ringing, metallic and final. "The fabric is already cut. All that's left is to sew the final seam. Draw up the paperwork. I will pay your fee in cash right now." He called his assistant in, dictated the exact terms, cited the relevant sections of the Civil Code, and 40 minutes later he slid 3 copies of an official, stamped, numbered document bearing his firm's letterhead across the desk. I signed every single page with a steady hand. The stroke of my pen was fast, dark, and final. I put the copies in my purse. I shook Arthur's hand goodbye and walked out onto the street. The afternoon air was starting to cool off, but I felt a clean, controlled fire burning in my chest. The walk back home felt shorter. When I slid the key into the front door lock, the silence that greeted me was thick and sticky. Chloe's friends had already left. I walked into the foyer and headed toward the living room. The scene was a disaster. There were wine glasses stained with lipstick scattered across the side tables, dried-out pieces of sushi stuck to the ceramic platters I had washed myself, crumpled napkins on the floor, and throw pillows tossed everywhere. The smell of cheap perfume and alcohol hung heavy in the air. From the back of the hallway, I heard Chloe's frantic footsteps. She was storming out of the guest room, violently opening and slamming drawers. She was wearing shorts and a basic t-shirt. Her hair was a mess, and her face, completely wiped of the arrogant smirk she'd worn hours earlier, showed a rising mix of confusion and panic. When she saw me standing in the living room doorway, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide. "Dorothy?" she snapped, completely dropping the condescending tone she used in front of her guests. "Where the hell are my clothes? I went to the laundry room and the washer is empty. The hamper is gone. My jackets aren't on the rack by the door. Where did you hide them? I need that silk blouse for a dinner tonight." "I did exactly what you asked me to do," I answered. My voice was calm, almost monotonous amidst the chaos she was starting to project. "You said the house smelled like poor people food, that we needed to maintain a standard for your friends. I noticed there was a lot of trash piling up, causing a stench and taking up space in the common areas. I just maintained order, just like you said we needed to. I took advantage of the city garbage truck driving by. There was over $1,000 of clothes in that hamper. Tell me this is a sick joke. Tell me you hid them in your room. By now, they're probably pressed under a few tons of garbage at the South County landfill." At that exact second, the sound of the side door unlocking cut us off. Jason walked into the house, wearing his gray logistics supervisor uniform, hauling his heavy work backpack. He stopped at the end of the hall, taking in the scene with exhausted, alarmed eyes. "What's going on? Why are you screaming, Chloe?" my son asked, dropping his bag on the floor and rushing toward her. Chloe threw herself into his arms, sobbing with a theatricality that would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. She buried her face in Jason's chest, pointing a shaking finger at me over his shoulder. "Your mother is insane, Jason. She's completely lost her mind," she shrieked, choking on manufactured tears. "She took all my dirty laundry, my silk blouses, my jeans, my jackets, and she threw them in the garbage truck. She left me with nothing. I told you she was losing it." "That she does things just out of pure spite, because she hates us. Look what she did." He stopped 3 feet away from me, invading my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. Exactly like he'd seen his wife do so many times. "Mom, tell me this isn't true," Jason demanded, his voice tight, his fists clenched at his sides. "Did you seriously throw her clothes in the trash? What the hell is wrong with you? Chloe gave them to you to wash. We keep you company, we take care of you, and you pull this stupid stunt. You are going to pay her back for every single cent of what you threw away. You are going to take money out of your pension and buy her new clothes tomorrow morning." I just saw a coward demanding my surrender to buy his own domestic peace. A perfect echo of his father, who at that very moment was still hiding out in the yard. "I am not paying a single cent, Jason," I said. My voice dropped an octave, turning thick and dangerous. "Your wife threw her dirty laundry in my face in front of total strangers and told me that was why you gave me a free roof in this house. Maybe Chloe is right. Maybe you need a medical evaluation. Or maybe it's time I take over total administration of this house and you retire and get some rest." From the end of the hall, Chloe nodded vigorously, wiping her tears, glaring at me with pure hatred. I let the silence settle over the living room. I let my son's threat bounce off the walls I built. Let it sink into the furniture I upholstered. I slowly raised my right hand and rested it on the black leather of my purse, feeling the stiffness of the legal folder inside. My fingers brushed the edge of the flap. Jason was waiting for an apology. He was waiting for a frightened old woman's tears, a plea for forgiveness so she wouldn't be shipped off to a nursing home or banished to a dark corner under his new regime. I gave him none of that. I offered a microscopic smile, an imperceptible curve at the corner of my mouth that didn't reach my eyes. "Clear rules," I repeated, tasting my son's words, feeling the weight of the document that was about to change the course of history. "You are absolutely right, Jason. We need very clear rules about who is putting a roof over whose head." I clutched my purse against my body, knowing the chessboard had just been flipped entirely, and took a step forward. I walked right past him without brushing his arm. My left shoulder was millimeters from Jason's puffed-out chest, but I didn't back up an inch, nor did I speed up my pace. The hardwood floor creaked under my sensible shoes, keeping a steady, methodical rhythm identical to an industrial sewing machine punching through layers of thick leather. Behind me, my son's stunned silence and my daughter-in-law's fake sobs crashed against my straight spine. I felt Jason reach out to grab my arm, a clumsy instinct for physical dominance, but his hand stopped in midair. The energy I was radiating in that moment wasn't that of a mother willing to negotiate. It was the energy of a landlord walking through her own domain. I kept my right hand gripped tight on my purse strap, feeling the rigid manila envelope holding the legal notice through the black leather. That paper was the blade of the scissors. I just had to measure the fabric one last time before making the final cut. I reached my bedroom door. I turned the brass knob, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. The metallic click echoed with absolute finality. The room was bathed in the bluish shadows of dusk. On the bed, under a woven wool blanket, Walter was fast asleep, or at least faking it, with the mastery of a man who has spent half a century running from reality. The air smelled like his eucalyptus joint rub, and the dust trapped in the heavy drapes Chloe hated so much. I sat on the edge of the mattress without turning on the lamp. I took off my shoes, slowly feeling the dull throb in my swollen ankles. The adrenaline was starting to drain from my bloodstream, leaving behind a mental clarity so cold it almost hurt to breathe. I looked at the motionless silhouette of my husband, and my mind drifted backward, pulled by the tide of memory. It was the winter of 1994. Jason was 17 and the whole world was too small for him. One Friday night, he sneaked out and stole the neighbor's car, an old sedan the man used as a taxi, and wrapped it around a telephone pole 3 blocks from here. The neighbor, desperate and furious, threatened to call the cops and ruin my son's life if we didn't pay for the damages immediately. Walter, true to his nature, locked himself in the bathroom and cried, saying we were ruined. I was the one who went down to the upholstery shop that very same night. I was the one who took on a rush job severely underpaid to reupholster every booth in a roadside diner. I remember the sharp fumes of the industrial glue, the red dust from the polyurethane foam floating in the basement air. I worked 72 hours straight. My fingers split open. The curved needle went clean through my right thumb, leaving a dark blood stain on the red vinyl of one of the seats. I paid Jason's debt in cash, bill by bill. When I handed him the receipt from the mechanic, my son didn't even say thank you. He just grabbed his jacket and went to play soccer with his friends, relieved that his stupidity had 0 consequences. At the time, I thought I was protecting him. I thought sacrifice was the ultimate expression of a mother's love. Today, sitting in the dark of my bedroom, I understood the magnitude of my mistake. Blind love doesn't raise strong men. It manufactures cowardly tyrants. I taught Jason that there would always be someone willing to bleed to clean up his messes. And now he expected me to keep bleeding, just to keep his wife's fantasy intact. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the darkness slowly dissolve into the gray tones of dawn. At 7 a.m., I heard noises in the kitchen, rushed footsteps, the clinking of coffee mugs, tense whispering. Jason hadn't gone to work. I put on my clean apron, combed my gray hair back into a tight bun at the nape of my neck, grabbed my purse with the document inside, and walked out into the hall. When I stepped into the kitchen, the scene waiting for me confirmed my suspicion that Jason had decided to execute his threat from the night before. Sitting at the head of my oak table, holding a steaming mug of tea, was a woman in her 50s, wearing an immaculate tailored suit and wire-rimmed glasses. On the table in front of her sat a leather briefcase and an open notepad. Jason was standing by the fridge, arms crossed, glaring, while Chloe sat next to the stranger, rubbing her eyes with a tissue in a pathetic attempt to fake crying. "Mom," Jason said the second I crossed the threshold, his voice loaded with a fake compassion that made my stomach turn. "I'm so glad you're up. This is Dr. Elena Hayes. She's a geriatric psychiatrist. I asked her to come see you after the incident with the clothes yesterday. You were looking at me with these blank eyes, like you didn't even recognize me. Living like this is torture. We're terrified that one day you're going to leave the gas on or hurt Walter. With a diagnosis of senile dementia, he could initiate legal proceedings for conservatorship, declare me incompetent to manage my own assets, and consequently seize total control of the house. It was a coup d'etat, executed by a coward, using medicine as a weapon." I walked over to the coffee maker, grabbed my white ceramic mug, and poured myself some black coffee. My hands didn't shake. The dark liquid fell in a perfect, silent stream. I turned around, leaned my hip against the counter, and looked the psychiatrist right in the eyes. "Dr. Hayes," I finally spoke. My voice rang out, clear, steady, and entirely stripped of any emotional waver. I understand your position. You were called in for an emergency. You were paid for a house call, and you were sold a family tragedy. If you'd like, you can run whatever cognitive tests you think are necessary. Ask me to count backward from 100 by sevens. Ask me to memorize 3 words. Ask me who the president is or what year it is. I am entirely at your disposal. But first, I suggest you ask my son and my daughter-in-law to leave my kitchen. Medical evaluations require privacy, don't they? She looked at Jason, then at Chloe, and finally nodded slowly. You are absolutely right, Dorothy, the psychiatrist said, clicking her pen shut. Jason, Chloe, please wait for us in the living room. I need to speak with your mother alone. Please step out, the doctor ordered this time with a firmness that left no room for argument. Jason clenched his jaw, shooting me a death glare, and dragged Chloe out of the kitchen by the elbow. I heard their footsteps retreating down the hall to the living room. Once silence ruled the room again, I walked over to the table and sat in the chair opposite Dr. Hayes. I set my leather purse on my lap. All right, Dorothy, the psychiatrist began opening her notepad. Do you know what day it is today? You are here because my son Jason, who works as a logistics route supervisor and has a long track record of financial failures, desperately needs a legal excuse to strip me of my property. And regarding the laundry incident yesterday, there was no disorientation. Your daughter-in-law claims I threw away expensive clean clothes for no reason. Yesterday afternoon, in front of 2 of her friends, she pulled a makeup-stained silk blouse, sweatpants smelling of stale body odor, and a pair of dirty socks out of a hamper. She threw the bundle directly at my chest and ordered me to wash them immediately, adding verbatim the phrase, "That's why we give you a free roof in this house." I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't lose my memory. I simply picked up the clothes, went to the laundry room, stuffed absolutely every single piece of her hoarded clothing into 2 heavy-duty black industrial trash bags, dragged them to the curb, and waited patiently for the city garbage truck to roll by at 4:40 p.m. I watched the machine shred the clothes. It was a deliberate, calculated, and fully conscious act of deep cleaning. I sleep exactly as much as I need to. I eat what I cook myself because my daughter-in-law only orders takeout and leaves the dirty containers on this exact table for me to clean up. I replied, unzipping my purse. I pulled out a small black notebook, my meticulous ledger from the last 2 years. I slid it across the table into the doctor's hands. There are the receipts, Dr. Hayes. Dates, amounts, invoice numbers. For a year and a half, I have been paying 100% of the electric, water, gas, and internet bills for this house out of my retirement pension. My son and my daughter-in-law do not contribute a single red cent, yet they receive online shopping packages weekly. Jason makes enough to rent an apartment, but Chloe prefers to live here, treating me like her unpaid live-in maid, because it allows her to maintain a lifestyle they cannot afford. I am not crazy, doctor. I have simply stopped being docile. She reviewed the stapled receipts in the back pages. The silence in the kitchen grew thick, loaded with the crushing weight of evidence. The doctor closed the notebook and handed it back to me. There was a mix of respect and pity in her eyes, the kind of look a professional reserves for the survivors of a prolonged shipwreck. Dorothy, the psychiatrist said, snapping her briefcase shut, you have an enviable level of lucidity. Your orientation to time, place, and person is flawless. Your short and long-term memory are perfectly intact, and your capacity for judgment and reasoning is superior to most people your age. What you are suffering from is not dementia. It is financial and psychological elder abuse, which is why I am taking action. I am going to charge them the absolute maximum rate for an unjustified house call. And if you ever need medical testimony for legal proceedings, my card is on the table. The notary's office had been downtown, a gloomy place that smelled of dark tobacco and damp paper. The clatter of mechanical typewriters filled the air. Walter had sat next to me, his work boots covered in sawdust, staining the marble floor. His hands were shaking. That very same day at the lumberyard, a bandsaw had snapped, amputating 3 fingers from the foreman right in front of his eyes. The terror of death, of sudden disability, had shattered whatever little faith Walter had in the future. When the notary pushed the deed for the lot we had just bought across the desk, Walter backed away. Put it all in her name, my husband had said, his voice cracking. Only in Dot's name. If the saw takes my hand, the Mills lawyers will take everything we have, so they don't have to pay out a pension. Let the house be yours, Dot, just yours. That way nobody can touch it. I took the pen. My signature was firm, dark, final. Walter's cowardice, his pathological fear of conflict and disaster, was paradoxically what handed me the most impenetrable legal shield a woman of my generation could ask for. He did it out of fear. I accepted it as a blood pact, a pact my son, in his arrogance, was completely unaware of. Dr. Hayes stood up, tore the page off her invoice pad, and walked toward the kitchen door. I followed a few steps behind her. When we reached the hallway, Jason and Chloe stood up from the living room sofa with expressions of anxious expectation. Jason practically sprinted over, holding his hand out to receive what he assumed was my civil death warrant. "Well, doctor," my son asked, trying to sound heartbroken, "how severe is the dementia progressing? We need to get her into a facility." Using psychiatric emergency services to try and declare a family member incompetent over domestic disputes is a severe ethical violation. My fee for this visit is $200. I suggest you transfer the funds before noon. Good day. His eyes scanned the lines the doctor had written, and I watched the blood drain from his face, rapidly replaced by a red flush of rage creeping up his neck. Chloe, looking over his shoulder, read the certificate and balled her hands into fists at her sides. Her master plan had crumbled in under 20 minutes. If she's not crazy, then she just did it out of pure evil. Chloe hissed, her voice shaking with rage, instantly dropping the concerned daughter-in-law act. "I told you, Jason, she's a bitter old hag who hates me. She threw my clothes in the trash, knowing exactly what she was doing. She humiliated me on purpose." There was no trace left of the son I had once rocked to sleep. Standing in front of me was a man cornered by his own mediocrity, desperate to establish dominance. "All right, Mom, if you want to play games, if you want to act lucid and start a war in this house, we're going to play by my rules," Jason decreed, pointing his index finger just inches from my nose. "From this second on, things change. Since you're so healthy, you can start packing your bags. This Sunday, Chloe's parents are coming over for lunch. They're driving in from out of town, and they're going to stay for a couple of weeks to help us get our finances organized. We are giving them your bedroom, the master suite. You are moving into the sewing room in the back. It's small, but it's enough for you. We are taking over the administration of this house because you clearly don't know how to live with a family. You have until Sunday morning to empty your closets. If you don't do it, I will, and I'll throw your crap in the yard. Do you understand me?" They wanted to exile me from my own bedroom, the room I had shared with my husband for 40 years, just to install Chloe's parents like the new monarchs of a conquered territory. It was the final nail in the coffin, the absolute confirmation that to Jason, I was no longer a mother, but a physical obstacle that needed to be removed and shoved into a dark corner. As I listened to him dictate my banishment, the third memory hit me with the force of a whip. It was the rainy night they arrived at my door, begging for shelter, the torrential rain lashing against the living room windows, Chloe soaking wet, shivering, clutching her designer suitcase, Jason crying at the kitchen table. "It'll just be for a few months, Mom," he had said. "I swear we won't be a burden. We'll respect your space, your routine. We just need a place to crash until the storm passes. We're begging you." And Chloe, looking at me with those kicked puppy eyes, had added, "You are an angel, Miss Dorothy. We'll never forget this. This is your house, and we'll be totally invisible." I looked at my son's index finger, threatening me. Then I looked at Chloe, smiling with pure superiority from the end of the hall, actually believing her husband's brute force had finally broken me. I didn't move a single muscle in my face. I showed no pain, no outrage, no fear. Slowly, with the exact same deliberate care I used to thread a needle in the shop, I nodded. "Sunday." I repeated, my voice hollow and agreeable, a velvet trap laid over a pit of spikes. "Sunday sounds like an excellent day to make some permanent changes to how this house is run." "Don't worry, Jason. By lunchtime on Sunday, everything will be exactly where it belongs. We want them to feel like the owners of the house." I polished the hardwood floors until they caught the sunlight like mirrors. I washed the living room drapes. I vacuumed every corner. I waxed the dining room table. Jason and Chloe watched me from the periphery, smirking, assuming my cleaning frenzy was me accepting my new role as the permanent live-in maid for their extended family. Walter, sensing the electric tension in the air, spent the entire weekend locked in the tool shed, running from the incoming cataclysm. Sunday morning, I woke up at dawn. I prepped the biggest, most expensive prime rib roast I could find at the neighborhood butcher. I minced garlic, onions, and peppers, creating a rub that filled the house with a thick, festive aroma. I threw together fresh salads, baked homemade bread, and pulled out my best porcelain china, the set I only saved for Christmas. I set the dining room table with a white linen tablecloth, lining up the silver cutlery with millimeter precision. In the dead center of the table, right next to the massive platter of steaming meat, I placed a small wicker bread basket. I left it completely empty. At 12:30 p.m., I went to my bedroom. I opened my leather purse. I pulled out the manila envelope holding the 3 original copies of the notarized eviction notice, signed, sealed, and dated by Arthur Vance, legally stipulating the non-negotiable 30-day deadline for Jason and Chloe to vacate my property due to the revocation of their tenancy at will. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the weight of 40 years of sweat and scars. I folded the envelope in half and shoved it deep into the front pocket of my white apron, pressing it against my stomach. The front doorbell rang at exactly 1 o'clock. I heard Chloe's high-pitched squeals of excitement echoing down the hall, the sound of the deadbolt clicking and the booming voices of her parents flooding the foyer. "Oh my God, what a gorgeous house, sweetie," croaked Connie, Chloe's mother. "Jason told me you guys are finally taking full control of the place. It's about time you had the space you deserve." I took a deep breath, tasting the smell of roasted meat and betrayal, and walked slowly toward the dining room, ready to serve them the main course. The smell of prime rib, crispy garlic, and rosemary flooded the room, instantly clashing with the sickly sweet perfume Chloe's mother had dragged in with her. The scene unfolding around my oak table, the exact same table I had bought secondhand and restored, sanding the wood down until my fingerprints were practically gone, was the visual representation of a completed invasion. Robert, my daughter-in-law's father, had planted himself at the head of the table, the chair Walter had occupied for 40 years. He was a heavy-set man with a red face and a booming voice, wearing a gold watch that was far too shiny on his left wrist. Sitting to his right was Connie, his wife, a woman who shared Chloe's desperate need to project a wealth she didn't possess, dripping in heavy costume jewelry, her hair stiff with hairspray. Jason and Chloe sat on the sides, smiling with the smug satisfaction of 2 royals presenting their kingdom to the visiting court. Nobody stood up to help me carry the 10-pound platter. Nobody even bothered to move their crystal glasses to make room for me. I walked with my spine straight, my sensible shoes muffling my footsteps against the polished wood, and set the steaming meat dead center on the white linen tablecloth, right next to the wicker bread basket I had intentionally left empty. "Wow, smells pretty damn good," Robert commented, leaning over the table to inhale the steam off the beef without even glancing in my direction. "Jason told me the home cooking around here was a little basic, but this looks all right. Pass me the carving knife, son. I'll handle the meat. You pour that red wine I bought last week, the Black Label." My expression didn't change. I simply turned around and walked back to the kitchen. As I uncorked the bottle of wine on the counter, the echo of their conversation drifted to my ears with insulting clarity. "It really is a fantastic property, Jason. Seriously, congratulations." Robert's gravelly voice boomed. "Chloe mentioned you guys made a smart investment grabbing this place, but I had no idea the layout was this huge. With a solid remodel, this place will be worth a fortune in a couple of years. Gotta update it, though. That dark wood is totally out of style." "Yeah, Chloe and I have been talking about knocking down the wall between the living room and the hall to do an open concept thing. And well, now that you guys are here, we're gonna start by fixing up the master suite. The natural light from that big window is perfect for you, Mom." "Jason already decided you guys are taking that room for as long as you need," Chloe chimed in. "It's the absolute least we can do so you're comfortable while you help us out with the kids once we decide to have them. At her age, old people get too attached to their stuff sometimes. Plus, it's time that we, the ones actually bringing vitality and a future to this family, take the wheel. She just needs to rest and, help out with the light kitchen duty, like today." The weight of the manila envelope in my apron pocket was a cold anchor against my stomach. keeping me grounded in reality while they floated away in their bubble of lies. I started pouring the wine into the glasses, first for Robert, then for Connie. The dark red liquid splashed with a steady rhythm, staining the immaculate crystal. The lie they had spun was colossal. Jason and Chloe hadn't just taken over my house in practice. They had constructed an entire alternate reality for their guests. They had convinced them that they were the owners, the providers, the magnanimous benefactors, who were allowing Jason's elderly mother to live under their roof purely out of charity. They had erased my 40 years of labor. They had hidden the fact that my pension paid for the lights keeping them out of the dark and the water they were drinking. And they had reduced me to the role of a domestic burden, who should be grateful for the scraps of their supposed generosity. "Thanks, Dorothy. You can just leave the bottle right there," Connie told me, waving a hand without making eye contact, using that condescending tone pretentious women reserve for the hired help. "And please make sure the guest bathroom has clean towels. I'd like to freshen up after we eat." Robert had already carved the meat and was piling massive portions onto the porcelain plates. The fat was still softly sizzling. The banquet was at its peak of opulence, a feast funded entirely by my own wallet to celebrate my own exile. I stood a few feet away from the table, my hands clasped over my apron. Jason picked up his fork, but before he could stab his first piece of meat, he turned to me. The moment he considered the climax of his victory had arrived, his official coronation in front of his new court. "All right, Mom." Jason started wiping the corner of his mouth with his linen napkin. "Since we're all sitting here together, and like we agreed on Friday, I think this is the perfect time to make the changes official. My in-laws are exhausted from the drive, and they're going to want to get settled into the master bedroom after lunch to take a nap. I need you to hand over the keys to your room right now. And tell me you already cleared your stuff out of the closets, because I really don't want Chloe dealing with your old clothes this afternoon." Robert and Connie stared at me, waiting to see the defeated old woman submit and hand over the keys to her castle. Chloe smirked behind her wine glass, her eyes shining with vicious glee. She was savoring every single second of my public humiliation, getting her revenge for the clothes the garbage truck had shredded 3 days ago. I didn't move. I kept my breathing steady, feeling the constant thud of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I slowly slid my right hand into the deep front pocket of my white apron. My calloused fingers, used to finding a needle in the dark, brushed the edge of the manila envelope. "Did you hear me, Mom?" Jason pressed, raising his voice, his tone picking up an aggressive edge of impatience. His authority was being questioned in front of his audience, and his fragile ego couldn't handle the delay. "I asked for the keys to the master bedroom. Give them to me right now." "I am not handing over my bedroom." "Are you trying to make a scene in front of my in-laws? Do you want me to call Dr. Hayes again and tell her you're having another psychotic break? I told you the changes were happening today and in this house. What I say goes. You have been living inside an illusion so deep you actually ended up believing your own lie. And what's worse, you dragged your guests right into that same fantasy." I pulled out the 3 copies of the notarized notice, perfectly stapled, stamped with Arthur Vance's blue letterhead, with my signature inked on the final page. I took the first copy and, with a firm flick of my wrist, slid it across the linen tablecloth until it stopped right next to Jason's plate. I took the second one and placed it squarely in front of Chloe. The third one I kept in my hand. "What is this?" Jason stammered, looking down at the document. "A list of complaints, an inventory. Mom, I don't have time for your passive-aggressive games." I watched the arrogance drain out of his features, instantly replaced by a deathly pale white. His pupils dilated. His hands started to shake, making the heavy paper rattle with a pathetic, vibrating sound. This is a forgery," my son stuttered, his voice completely losing the artificial bass he had been projecting just minutes ago. "This isn't legally binding, it's just some paper printed off the internet." As his eyes scanned down the legal paragraphs, his face morphed from confusion to disbelief, and finally into a dark, silent fury. "Can somebody explain to me what the hell this means?" Robert demanded, slapping the paper against the table with the back of his hand. His gravelly voice bounced off the walls. He glared at Jason, then at Chloe. "It says right here, Notice of Revocation of Tenancy at Will." It says Dorothy Carmen Salazar is the sole and exclusive owner of this property, and that she is granting a non-negotiable 30-day deadline for the occupants Jason Salazar and Chloe Rojas to vacate the premises. What is this garbage? Jason, you told me this house was yours. You told me you bought it 3 years ago. Jason spun toward me, his eyes bulging, baring his teeth in a snarl of aggressive desperation. You are insane. My dad and you bought this house together. It's marital property. I have inheritance rights. You can't throw me out on the street with some cheap lawyer's printout. My pity was completely gone, leaving only the cold determination of justice. Your father, in a fit of panic 30 years ago, insisted that the deed be placed exclusively in my name to protect our assets from potential labor lawsuits. I explained, my voice ringing out clear and methodical, addressing not just Jason, but Chloe's parents as well. In the eyes of the law, this dirt, these bricks, and this roof belong exclusively to me. You do not have inheritance rights because I am not dead, and you do not have squatter's rights because we never signed a lease. You have lived here under my tolerance, a tolerance that has just expired. You made me tell the whole family you married some successful entrepreneur who bought you a mansion, and it turns out you're just a pair of freeloaders living off your mother-in-law. What a humiliation, Chloe. What a complete embarrassment. They were sobs of genuine panic. The raw reaction of a narcissist whose greatest fear, being exposed as a fraud to her social circle, had just materialized in the most brutal way imaginable. It's her fault, Mom, Chloe shrieked, pointing at me with shaking hands. She's an evil, selfish old hag who hates us. She's throwing us out purely for revenge, just because I didn't want to clean the kitchen a couple of times. I am throwing you out because you turned my house into a dumpster while pretending to be rich for your friends. And I am throwing you out because you let my son believe he could rob me of my peace and my dignity. I am truly sorry you were dragged into this charade, I said, looking at Robert and Connie. You came here believing you were going to take over a house that belonged to your son-in-law. The reality is that your son-in-law doesn't even own the silverware you're holding. He makes enough money to rent an apartment, but they chose to live here like parasites to fund the lifestyle your daughter demands and he cannot afford. Shut your mouth, Jason roared, stopping less than 2 feet away from me. I am not going to let you humiliate me in my own house. I'm going to rip that paper into 1,000 pieces and lock you in that sewing room until you rot. You are not throwing me out on the street. Do you hear me? I am your son. I just looked him dead in the eyes, using silence as the most lethal weapon a disappointed mother can wield. I felt the tension thick in the air, the panic of Connie screaming her son-in-law's name, Chloe's jagged breathing. Jason had his fist clenched and shaking in the air, but the empty, cold, unbreakable stare I shot back at him froze him in his tracks. He knew in the deepest depths of his cowardice that if he touched me, the cops would drag him out in handcuffs before sunset. Slowly, Jason lowered his arm. His shoulders slumped. His rage gave way to the crushing realization of his own utter powerlessness. He didn't have the money for a legal battle. He didn't have the backing of his father, who was still hiding somewhere in the yard. And now he didn't have the respect of his in-laws. I folded the third copy of the notice, the one I still held in my hand, and carefully tucked it into the front breast pocket of his work uniform, smoothing the fabric over his chest with 2 firm, final pats. On Thursday afternoon, in front of your friends, I began turning my head slowly to lock eyes with Chloe, who shrank back into her chair as if my words had physical weight. You threw a stained blouse and some reeking sweatpants in my face. You demanded I wash them right then, and you told me with an arrogance I will not forget for the rest of my life that that was why you gave me a free roof in this house. So I was at least good for something. Connie buried her face in her hands. I shifted my attention back to Jason, who was staring down at the paper sticking out of his pocket like it was his own death warrant. The irony, Jason, is that she had the right idea. She just got the target wrong, I whispered, my voice loaded with an absolute finality that echoed in the dead silence of the dining room. That is why I gave you a free roof for 2 years, so you would at least learn to respect the person feeding you. But since you didn't learn, the roof is gone. If there is a single shoe belonging to either of you left on this property on day 31, Arthur Vance will be here with a police cruiser and a court-ordered forced eviction. and I will personally haul your things out to the curb in black industrial trash bags. The front doorbell rang for a second time. A sharp, prolonged chime that sliced through the graveyard silence of the dining room like a train whistle right before a derailment. Not a single person moved a muscle. Jason was still frozen, staring blankly at the notarized notice sticking out of his uniform pocket. Chloe was shaking in her chair, her face streaked with the tears of her own exposed lies, while her parents, Robert and Connie, breathed with the heavy exhaustion of people who just discovered the floor beneath them was made of rotting cardboard. The prime rib, steaming and perfect in the center of the table, was starting to get cold. The fat was barely sizzling anymore. I turned around, giving them my back, with the exact same calm I felt when walking away from a finished piece of furniture, and walked down the hardwood hall toward the foyer. My sensible shoes tapped out a steady beat. I opened the front door. Standing on the porch, hiding from the midday sun, was a young kid in a navy blue uniform, holding a rectangular cardboard box stamped with the black and gold logo of one of the most expensive boutiques at the downtown mall. The kid wiped the sweat off his forehead with the back of his free hand and held out a tablet. Afternoon. Rush delivery, cash on delivery, for a Chloe Rojas, the delivery boy announced, dragging his words with the signature exhaustion of someone who'd been driving in the heat all day. Total is $480.50. Cash or card works, but the reader's acting up, so cash is better if you got it. I heard the screech of a wooden chair being shoved violently backward. Chloe appeared in the hallway archway, pale as a ghost, frantically wiping her cheeks with her hands. Behind her, her father's massive frame loomed into view, followed by Jason's shrunken shadow. I didn't ask for this to be delivered today, Chloe stammered, taking clumsy steps toward the door, trying to block the delivery boy's view into the house. I thought the charge already went through on my credit card online. There has to be a glitch in the store's system. The label says pretty clearly your card was declined 3 times last night for insufficient funds, and you hit the cash on delivery option this morning so you wouldn't lose the hold on the order, the kid replied, unimpressed. Manifest says it's a pair of shoes and a designer bag. Are you paying, or am I taking this back to the warehouse? She slowly turned toward Jason, giving him that manipulative, pleading look that had worked for her for years. Baby, my card is maxed out. Can you cover this? It's the outfit I need for my parents' anniversary dinner next week. I'll pay you back when you get paid. I swear. The man had just been legally served his eviction notice. His father-in-law had just uncovered his absolute moral and financial bankruptcy, and his wife, right in the middle of the apocalypse, was asking him for almost $500 for a pair of shoes. I don't have that kind of money, Chloe, Jason whispered, his voice cracking, completely gutted of the swaggering authority he'd been showing off over the roast beef just minutes prior. I have nothing in my account and you know it. I swear to God I am not giving you another dime for your clothes. I shut the front door with a soft, final click. The silence that settled over the foyer was thick, suffocating, loaded with a humiliation so pure you could almost taste it in the air. Robert looked Jason up and down, scanning his gray logistics uniform, his eyes locking onto the manila envelope sticking out of his chest pocket. The disgust in the older man's eyes was absolute. He was stripping my son of his manhood, his dignity, and his status in a matter of seconds. Connie, Robert barked, never taking his eyes off Jason. Chloe's mother appeared trembling in the hallway, clutching her purse to her chest. Go up to that guest room, grab our bags, and call a cab. We are going to a hotel downtown. I am not spending another minute under this woman's roof eating the meat she paid for, while my daughter and her husband play pretend millionaires on an old woman's pension. Jason is getting a promotion soon. We're going to buy our own house. I swear to God, they didn't speak to me. Not because they hated me, but because the guilt and secondhand embarrassment made it physically impossible for them to look me in the eye. Jason and Chloe stood frozen in the foyer alone, surrounded by the echo of their own lies, watching the cab pull away down the tree-lined street. I didn't stick around to watch the mourning process. I walked back to the dining room. I sat in my chair, picked up the carving knife, cut a perfect slice of the prime rib that was still holding on to a little heat, and served myself a huge spoonful of fresh salad. I ate in silence, chewing slowly, tasting the garlic and rosemary. From the hallway, the screaming started. The venomous blame, the muffled insults, the sound of something plastic shattering against a wall. Jason blamed Chloe for her insane spending. Chloe blamed Jason for being a total failure who couldn't even defend her. The Civil War had finally broken out in the enemy trenches. I poured myself half a glass of the Black Label red wine. I raised a silent toast to the empty chair at the head of the table, and I took a sip. The next day, the real siege began. A 30-day siege where my only weapon was the relentless brutality of my routine. First thing Monday morning, I called the cable company. I demanded the immediate cancellation of the premium TV package and requested a password change for the Wi-Fi. The router, which until then had sat on a hallway table, was unplugged, moved to my bedroom, and locked away. When Chloe woke up at noon and realized she couldn't upload photos to her social media or stream her shows, she stormed down to the kitchen, demanding answers. I didn't answer her. I just kept whisking my eggs for breakfast. Her tantrum bounced off my back like pebbles against a concrete wall. On Tuesday, I bought a heavy-duty forged steel padlock and installed it on the door of the large kitchen pantry, where I kept my non-perishables, my olive oils, my coffee beans, and my homemade jams. I cleared out the top 2 shelves of the refrigerator, taking all my fresh vegetables, lean meats, and dairy, and moved them into a small mini-fridge Walter used to keep in his shop, which I had dragged up to my room. On the empty kitchen shelves, I carefully arranged Chloe's half-eaten pizza boxes, the sticky Asian takeout containers, and a carton of sour milk she had left out the night before. On Wednesday, Jason tried to confront me. He cornered me in the laundry room while I was loading a batch of whites. His face was hollowed out, carved with deep bags under his eyes, and his uniform reeked of stale cigarette smoke, a habit he'd picked back up from the stress. "What exactly are you trying to prove with this, Mom?" my son hissed, gripping the edge of the white plastic washing machine. "You cut off the internet. You locked up the food. Chloe is having panic attacks in the bedroom because she can't talk to her friends. Is torturing us fun for you? Do you feel real powerful with that notary paper? I simply stopped funding the lifestyle that you should be paying for your wife to have. If Chloe wants internet, you can buy her a data plan for her phone. If you guys want fresh food, the grocery store is 4 blocks away, and it's open until 10 p.m. You demanded to manage your own lives. I am just giving you the absolute freedom to do it on your own dime. And I'll remind you, you have 27 days left." Chloe had to start washing her own clothes by hand in the bathroom sink, absolutely terrified of going anywhere near the laundry room, in case her clothes magically vanished into industrial trash bags again. I saw her one afternoon hanging cheap blouses from the doorknobs to dry her ruined, manicured hands shaking with sheer frustration. Her country club friends stopped coming around. The rumor of her humiliation in front of her parents had spread like wildfire through dry brush. The illusion of the wealthy, self-sacrificing young wife had disintegrated, leaving behind a woman trapped in the misery of her own arrogance. It was during the second week that Walter, my husband, finally decided to emerge from his shell of cowardice. He had spent the last 14 days hiding out in the tool shed at the back of the yard, listening to his football games on his portable radio, eating cold sandwiches I left for him on the back windowsill so he wouldn't have to cross paths with our son. But the tension was too much even for him. One Tuesday night, while I was sitting at the dining room table sewing a tear in a curtain hem, Walter shuffled in, wearing his worn-out slippers. He sat in the chair across from me, turned off his hearing aid, and looked at me with those watery, pleading eyes he always used when he wanted me to clean up the chaos he allowed. "Dot," Walter mumbled, scratching a gray beard he hadn't shaved in days. "It's been enough, don't you think? Jason is hurtin' real bad. I hear him crying out in the yard in the middle of the night. That girl, Chloe, she's pale as a ghost. They're family, Dot. Blood is blood. You can't just throw them out on the street like stray dogs. Tell them they can stay. Give them rules if you want, but don't break the family apart. I don't want to live in a house where my own son hates me." The black cotton thread pulled a perfectly straight line under the glow of the lamp. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 4.5 decades, the man who had abandoned me in every single trench, through every financial crisis, through every parenting conflict. "You gave up on your family the day you put those headphones on, so you wouldn't have to hear your daughter-in-law insult me, Walter." I told him, my voice devoid of anger, loaded only with a cold, immovable truth. You broke Jason when you taught him that bowing your head and hiding was how you act like a man. This house is mine. I built it, I maintain it, and I decide who gets to breathe under this roof. Jason and Chloe leave on day 30. There is no negotiation. There is no magic forgiveness. If their leaving hurts you that much, pack your bags and go with them. I am giving you the exact same freedom I gave him. But if you decide to stay in my house, you will follow my rules. And the first rule is that we do not shed a single tear for the people who tried to destroy us. The remaining days burned down like the tobacco in Jason's cigarettes, fast, toxic, leaving a trail of ash on the floor. On day 28, they started packing. They didn't hire professional movers. They obviously didn't have the credit for it. Jason scrounged up used cardboard boxes from the corner grocery store. The sound of packing tape ripping and sticking echoed through the hallways for 48 straight hours. The morning of day 30 broke cloudy, with a cold breeze signaling the end of autumn. At exactly 9 a.m., a rusted flatbed truck, probably borrowed from one of Jason's coworkers, parked at my curb. I sat down in the dark green velvet armchair in the living room, holding a mug of black coffee, and watched the parade of defeat. Jason carried the heavy boxes, his muscles shaking from the effort, his face drenched in cold sweat. He wouldn't look at me. He walked past the living room with his head down, dragging his feet. Chloe carried the light stuff, her nightstand lamps, the shiny plastic decorations I hated so much, her fashion magazines. The poetic irony of the day materialized when I saw her walk out the front door carrying the rest of her clothes. Since they couldn't afford wardrobe boxes, Chloe was hauling her sweaters and dresses stuffed into massive black plastic bags. Heavy-duty industrial trash bags. The exact same ones I had used to feed the garbage compactor. She walked right past me, dragging the plastic across the hardwood floor, her eyes locked on the open front door, fleeing my presence as if I were a contagious disease. By 11:30, the guest room was empty. All that was left was the dust gathered behind the furniture they never bothered to clean. Jason stopped in the threshold of the front door. He was filthy, exhausted, and utterly defeated. He was holding my house keys in his right hand. He stared at them for a second, tightened his lips, and walked into the living room. He stopped 6 feet from my armchair and dropped the keychain onto the oak coffee table. The metal rang out with a sharp clink. "Here are your damn keys," Jason said, his raspy voice scraping the absolute bottom of his shattered pride. "Are you happy, Mom? Are you proud of what you did? You won. You threw us out on the street. We're going to a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side, right next to a loud avenue, because that's all I could afford for the deposit. You destroyed your own blood over some laundry and your own pride." "I wasn't playing a game, Jason, which means I didn't win anything," I answered, setting my mug down on its ceramic coaster. "And I did not destroy my blood. You destroyed yourself the day you let your wife throw her filth in my face while you stood there and clapped for her. The street you're moving to is the one you paved yourself, with every electric bill you refused to pay. Leave, and close the door carefully. The hinges were just oiled." He turned around, walked down the hall, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled the heavy oak door shut. The click of the deadbolt was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 2 years. I stood up from the armchair, walked to the front door, and slid the manual security chain into place. Then I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bucket, filled it with hot water and pine-scented cleaner, and spent the next 5 hours scrubbing the hardwood floors of the entire house. I literally erased their footprints. I purified the air. I reclaimed every square inch of my territory. 6 months later, spring had brought the color back to the rose garden. The house was breathing again. I threw out the living room rug that still held the scent of Chloe's sweet perfume, leaving the wood bare and shining. My potted ferns and African violets had made a triumphant return from their exile in the yard, taking over the sunlit corners of the hallway and the side tables. Walter was still living here, of course, but he had turned into a quiet, docile ghost. He spent his days tending the garden, cleaning the gutters, speaking in a low voice, and making absolutely sure he didn't leave a mess in the kitchen. The balance of power had been restored with the force of a hammer strike. It was a Thursday afternoon right around 4:40. I was sweeping the sidewalk in front of my house, clearing away the dried flowers the wind had ripped from the trees. The roar of the city garbage truck's diesel engine announced its arrival from the corner. The massive white and green vehicle hissed to a stop right in front of me. Frank, the broad-shouldered garbage man, jumped down to the street. He had a bright smile, his face beaded with sweat. I handed him a plastic cup of ice-cold lemonade I had ready for him. "Afternoon, Miss Dorothy." Frank greeted me, taking the cup gratefully and downing half of it in one gulp. "The front of the house is looking beautiful. You can tell the place is at peace." He glanced up and down the street before dropping his voice a little, taking on that neighborhood gossip tone that ties working folks together. "Hey, I don't know if I should mention this, but I saw your boy last week," Frank told me, looking genuinely sympathetic. "They rerouted us for a couple days over by those old apartment complexes on the south side. Saw him walking out of one of those gray buildings with the water damage on the walls. He was in a dirty uniform walking to the bus stop. And the wife, Chloe, I saw her working the register at that discount pharmacy on the same block. Had the neon green uniform vest on. She was screaming at a customer over some expired coupons. They looked real tired, Miss Dorothy." The image of Chloe the woman, who demanded sushi platters and humiliated old women in front of her rich friends, trapped behind a cash register fighting over discount coupons. It didn't bring me joy, or a sense of triumph, or regret. It made me feel the exact same way I felt when the garbage truck shredded her silk blouse. The quiet satisfaction of knowing the math of the universe is exact, and the debt was paid in full. Everyone builds the roof they choose to live under. "Frank," I told him, taking the empty cup from his hands. "You have a good route." In the center of the living room, resting on two wooden sawhorses, sat an antique dining chair I had picked up at a flea market that very morning. The mahogany wood was scratched, the seat was caved in, and the original fabric was rotting away. It was a complete disaster. It was perfect. I walked over to my toolbox, pulled out my pliers, my tack hammer, and my staple gun. I ran my calloused fingers covered in old scars over the edge of the damaged wood. I grabbed the new fabric, a heavy, durable cream-colored canvas, and stretched it tight over the fresh foam. I pressed the nose of the staple gun hard against the wood, calculating the perfect angle. I took a deep breath in the absolute silence of my own home, and I pulled the trigger. The metallic snap echoed, loud, firm, and final, driving the staple exactly where I wanted it to go. This story, as powerful and stirring as it is shared purely for educational purposes, to spark reflection on how we navigate our closest relationships and find our own inner strength. Listening to Dorothy's journey, I am deeply moved by the quiet courage it takes to rebuild one's own dignity from the ground up. We are often taught that family means endless, unconditional sacrifice, even at the cost of our own mental well-being. However, this narrative beautifully challenges that notion by illustrating that true love sometimes requires setting unbreakable boundaries. When we constantly shield our loved ones from the consequences of their actions, we are not helping them grow. We are merely enabling their immaturity. Dorothy's transformation from a silent sufferer to a fiercely independent woman is a profound reminder that respect must always be a two-way street. It breaks my heart to see how vulnerability in old age can be exploited, yet her tactical brilliance offers a beacon of hope. She teaches us that peace should never be purchased with our own self-worth. The way she handled the cruelty thrown at her, not with screaming, but with cold, calculated clarity, shows immense emotional maturity. It is a stark realization that blind affection can accidentally manufacture tyrannical behavior in those we love most. By reclaiming her home, she didn't just evict her son and daughter-in-law, she offered them the ultimate, albeit painful, lesson in personal accountability. Life will inevitably hand us our own heavy burdens, and we must choose whether to let them suffocate us or use them as a catalyst for change. We must remember that holding people accountable is, in its purest form, an act of profound humanism. It forces them to face reality and gives them the opportunity to rebuild their lives on genuine effort rather than entitlement. Dorothy's calloused hands are a testament to the fact that we alone are the architects of our own sanctuary. Ultimately, the lasting peace we seek is only found when we finally decide that our dignity is no longer up for negotiation. To apply this to our own lives, we must start evaluating the boundaries we set with those around us. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. The greatest lesson here is to practice compassionate detachment, loving people enough to let them carry their own weight. Build your life on mutual respect and never be afraid to protect your peace. Disclaimer. The story shared and the commentary provided are for educational, reflective, and entertainment purposes only. They are not intended as legal, psychological, or professional advice. Every personal and family situation is unique, and listeners should consult with qualified professionals for guidance regarding their specific circumstances. The creator assumes no responsibility or liability for any decisions or actions taken based on the content of this presentation.